you everyone for coming to our first in-person event of the year for the Work Practices Committee. Our names are Isabella and Nina, and we're the co-chair of VWL's Work Practices Committee. We would firstly like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we stand today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here. We pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. On behalf of the VWL, we thank you for joining us this afternoon. VWL is the peak representative body of the women lawyers in Victoria. We aim to assist women lawyers in achieving a satisfying, successful professional life. We are very excited to be here today to launch the Parental Leave in Practice, a how-to guide for lawyers. A copy has been prepared for everyone, so if you haven't already grabbed one, you can grab one outside. We would also like to sincerely thank Maurice Blackburn for generously sponsoring the event and putting together the guide, a project that has been in the work for a few years.
We would like to welcome our moderator for the event today, Natalie Campbell. Natalie has a depth of experience in disputes involving employment and industrial law, discrimination, public law and class actions. Natalie acts for and advises clients spanning a range of industries, including public and private companies, state and Commonwealth agencies, registered organisations and employees. She's an experienced trial and appellant advocate who appears both led and unled in state and federal courts and tribunals. Natalie's expertise has been recognised by Doyle's Guide, and she's recommended in the list of leading employment law junior counsel Victoria 2022. Prior to coming to the bar, Natalie was the associate to the Honourable Dr. Chris Jessup QC at the Federal Court of Australia. At the bar, she read with Richard Dalton QC, and her senior mentor is Paul O'Grady QC. Natalie has taken 2 periods of parental leave, once just prior to coming to the bar and once in her 3rd year at the bar. Natalie has 2 children called Maggie, who is 5, and Eddie, who is 3. I'd like to welcome Natalie. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina, and thanks, Isabella. I'd like to really thank Victorian Women's Lawyers for your involvement and support in producing the guide, and in particular Maurice Blackburn. I can see that a huge amount of work has gone into what will be a very valuable resource for lawyers in Victoria for many years to come. My first thing that I'd like to do today is to introduce Jennifer Canis. She has an extremely impressive range of experiences relevant to our cause today. She currently leads Maurice Blackburn's dedicated social justice practice, and much of Maurice Blackburn's pro bono work is conducted through that. She's also the interim chair of the Queen Victoria Women's Centre, and between 2012 and 2014, she was the state member for Melbourne and held the position of Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Justice and Mental Health, and was also the Deputy Chair of the Victorian Parliament's Accountability and Oversight Committee, and was on the Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Committee. I'd like to welcome Jennifer, who will introduce the guide to us today.
Thank you. I've got one of these. Thank you very much, Natalie. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It's a real pleasure for Maurice Blackburn to host today's session. I do feel like I'm a little bit of an imposter here going through the guide because I didn't write it, but Jessica and Emily, who did write it, couldn't be here today. But I'm not so much of an imposter because many years ago I was co-chair of the Work Practices Committee, and I think about 10 or 15 years ago we launched a similar kind of guide. So it's really interesting for me seeing how these issues, they change, but they're still relevant to everyone. And particularly at Morris Blackburn, one of the things that we've been really conscious about is making sure that we're a good workplace for men and women, and making sure that we particularly make sure that women reach their potential in our firm. And one of the things that we saw was really important at the firm was in relation to parental leave and to having good parental leave entitlements for women, but also extending those parental leave entitlements to men. And I think Daniel might talk about that today. But we see that equality at home is really important and brings equality at work as well. So today I'm going to talk to you through a little bit about, I've got a black and white copy, a little bit about the guide. And look, becoming a parent is a really exciting, challenging and rewarding time. And, you know, very little is certain about parenthood, I think, except that nothing will ever be the same again. And some of that's great, and a lot of that is great, but some of it's really difficult, and particularly when you're in the middle of things. And as a new parent, there is lots of information around. There's lots of information that's available for you, and it can be overwhelming. And I think that one thing that's really great about this guide is that it sets things out so clearly, and it helps lawyers in particular navigate their way through both work and parenting. And one thing is that I think is particularly good about the guide is that it doesn't have all the answers, but what it does do is help you work out what you don't know. And I'd encourage people, you know, who are thinking about parenthood, or who are managing people who are about to become parents, that you read through the whole guide, because I think it's really useful to reflect and to know what you don't know, and to have some expectation about what the different stages might be. Because, you know, once you're a parent and a new parent, it's really tricky, and there will be, you know, there's a little person, baby in arms, or, you know, mine's 10, he's grown, but who will take up a lot of your time. And so the more you can know before you embark on parental leave, the better. And the first section of the guide covers entitlements and money matters. And, you know, you will have heard that having a baby is expensive, and it kind of is, but sometimes I think it doesn't need to be as well. And a little bit of practical guidance is, you know, beg, borrow and steal what you can. There's lots of really good pre-loved stuff around. And also, you know, maybe not being, you know, too anxious about it, because sometimes not going out for dinner twice a week, and, you know, and having a child, you find that there's a bit of money that maybe wasn't there before. But having said that, the rental mortgage still needs to be paid. And I think that one of the great things about the guide is it goes through your basic entitlements that I think you really need to be aware of what they are. But a lot of lawyers also work in places where there is paid entitlements as well. And it's really important that you know what your particular workplace's entitlements are. And I found that one of the things that was really useful around the guide is it talked about some of the ways to think about maybe structuring. If you've got a paid parental leave, whether you take it as a, you know, look, I know when I had a child, I did double the time at half the pay. But sometimes you might find a different way of structuring it works for you. So there are some ideas there and things about who to talk to. And also the thing about insurance and super. We've just got a new EBA, and Daniel, I'm pretty sure that we're now paying superannuation on parental leave, which is amazing, and it's a really great thing because you see that that's one of the big financial inequalities that women face. But I guess a personal note about insurance, if you are going to have your child in a private hospital with private health insurance, you still need to pay a lot. Yeah. So yeah, maybe public, but also make sure you know about those because it can be an unexpected expense. The second section covers timing and planning. And it's something that I think most people who want to be parents or who are parents are familiar with. And I think there are some also really important things. You have certain obligations that you need to think about when you're going on parental leave, and making sure that you don't miss those times. So that's part of it, sets out the obligations that you have, which is really important. And importantly for lawyers, we look at some of your obligations in relation to your practicing certificate and your CPD points and things like that. And it's a really important thing to think about before you go on leave, because you don't want to be thinking about it when you're on leave or when you're coming back and having to scramble around. And please, in relation to timing, can take advice regarding childcare. There's some really good hints and tips about childcare in this guide, but good childcare is amazing, and will be great for you and great for your child. But it can be tricky, so there's some really good questions in there. I do know that when, for example, I was looking at childcare, we chose something that was close to home, so both my partner and I could do the drop-offs and pick-ups. But you need to think about what's important to you and whether maybe something closer to work might be good. So please, there's some really great questions in there. The third section really covers communication, and I think that's a really important thing in relation to lawyers, because you need to communicate not only with your employer, but your colleagues and, importantly, your clients and stakeholders. Because importantly, as lawyers, we have obligations to our clients. A lot of the time when women are going on parental leave is at the stage where they're building their practice. And so that communication with clients is really important. And I found open communication was the best way to do it. It made coming back to work better as well, because people weren't wondering why you had smudges on your clothes and things like that. So, I think just bringing some of that realistic expectations to your work is really important. I think the other very good thing about the guide is it talks about some of those things that we're probably a bit more familiar with post-COVID, but I didn't know what MyGov was when I went on parental leave or what a CRN was. And I think my son's birth certificate still has the wrong date for the date that my husband and I got married. So try and get some, look at these, try and make notes of these things and attend to them earlier rather than later, because sometimes when you've got baby brain, things don't work particularly well. And the last section is around keeping in touch and consultation. And I think that's also really important in relation to your return to work. And it's a section that I would also encourage managers to read and think about as well, because it is as much the responsibility of the person going on parental leave as it is for the manager. So please have a look at some of those questions there. And remember that not one box fits everyone. And the other really good advice that I was reflecting on in this guide was about talking to other parents. There are lots of really good support groups. I know Victorian Women Lawyers provides mentoring and support. And when you're having those conversations, I guess really thinking about not only talking to people about what did work, but also talking to them about what didn't work. I think that's something that's really important as well. I'm going to finish off here because we really want to hear from our panellists. But I guess my final bit of advice is when you're returning to work, keep your dressing gown on until you leave the house. Avoid smudges. And then if you do get smudges, wet wipes, fix everything, and make your clothes still look nice. So really, thank you to Victorian Lawyers for putting this guide together. Thank you to all the panellists as well. It's our pleasure at Maurice Blackburn to host today. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. That was a wonderful introduction to the guide, and also thanks for sharing your personal tips and advice. I'm sure for many of us those things rang true and will come in handy for those who are entering this very important stage of life. I'm going to start by introducing each of our speakers before we move on to the panel discussion. The first is Her Honour Judge Claire Quinn. It is Her Honour's birthday today, so please everybody wish Her Honour a very happy birthday. And thank you for
much older than all of you.
We're very grateful that you've taken time out of the party festivities to attend today. Her Honour was appointed to the County Court in 2014. She's worked as a Crown Prosecutor for 16 years, and this has given her a breadth of experience in all jurisdictions. Her Honour was seconded to Parliament in 2012 to provide advice to the parliamentary inquiry into the handling of child abuse by religious and other non-government organisations. She's also served as Senior Legal Counsel to the Victorian Parliament's Family and Community Development Committee inquiry that resulted in the Betrayal and Trust Report. Please welcome Her Honour today. Our next panellist is Jane Parker. She's currently the Acting Managing Principal Lawyer of the Specialist Children's Court Prosecution Unit at Victoria Police and is responsible for the oversight and support of all children's court prosecutions conducted by Victoria Police in Victoria. She contributes to the youth justice sector via the provision of legal advice, law reform consultation and membership on many committees and engagement in youth justice projects and initiatives. She has previous experience within the trial division of the Office of Public Prosecutions and has worked in the Child Protection Litigation Office, Victoria Legal Aid and in private practice. Jane's very passionate about the mentoring and development of women lawyers and was involved in the Diverse Women's Mentoring Association as a mentor. Catherine Brooks is our next speaker. She wears many hats. She's the Senior Employment Lawyer and Accredited Specialist in Workplace Relations. Her current role is at Wendy Brooks and Partners, and she helps organisations to amplify their impact and resources to contribute to more equitable and socially and a more socially just world. She's committed to helping both employers and employees make flexible work and is the author of a very relevant book to today called Let's Make It Work, Baby, a guide to help new parents work flexibly to achieve their personal and professional goals. Lastly, we have Daniel Victory behind me on the screen. He's a principal lawyer in the employment and industrial law practice at Maurice Blackburn. He advises senior executive clients in all areas of employment law, including workplace bullying, employment contracts, redundancy, restraint of trade, discrimination, sexual harassment, adverse action and unfair dismissal. Speaking from my own perspective, Daniel is a gold frequent flyer in the federal court. He was also the first dad at Maurice Blackburn to take paid parental leave and has done so following the birth of both of his children. I'm going to start by asking each of our speakers today to talk a little bit about their own personal interest in the guide and in this area. But before I do so, I just wanted to cover that this is a safe and inclusive discussion for all. And the guide was designed to approach these issues in recognition that families come in all shapes and sizes, can include many different members in a family, and anybody who considers themselves a parent who is involved in a child's life, this guide is relevant to them. We also accept that a child may have more than one parent or several parents and carers, and that parents can be of any gender or sexual orientation. So to kick us off, Judge Quinn, I might ask you, probably best if I look at you this way, what do you find interesting about the guide in this area at the moment?
I must say I was very impressed when I saw it because I had been fearful that my experience wouldn't be particularly relevant to anyone really in the room because my children are 25, 21 and 19. So I'm well and truly over the getting my clothes dirty, smudged, all that stuff that we're talking about. And more, I'm even over running around from football training to, gymnastics or whatever. But I was impressed with the detail and the markers, I suppose, as to what the kind of things that you should really be thinking about. Because I had my first child in 1997, and there was nothing like that around at all. I don't think I even thought about a lot of those things. I was a bit stupid and continued to work right up until the day before I had my baby, and was actually in court. So I think it's great that you've been able to identify these things that need to be thought about, but also just be conscious not to be too overwhelmed by all of the information, because I must say when I read it I thought, oh my God, this is a lot to take in, and I've got to have a baby as well. So, you know, that was sort of my first reaction to the guide, which I think is really good. Thanks.
Thank you for that contribution. Jane, what about you? What was your interest in the area or the topic?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty new or fresh. I have a 20-month-old, so my journey is very much just begun. So for me, I think, you know, in respect of the guide, it's really practical. I think, you know, as some other people have mentioned, it's overwhelming becoming a parent, and even more so if you're a professional who's just become a parent, or who is on, you know, on their journey and is potentially pregnant, or their wife or partner is pregnant. So it's just a practical, I think, punchy guide that sets out all of the really relevant and pertinent information. So for me, I just found it incredibly helpful. It's a multifaceted pathway to embark on. You know, there's not only is there the medical things to consider, there's also your whole career and your professional life. So it's really important to be able to have a clear, I guess, understanding of your rights and things to consider. Where, you know, I think when I was first pregnant, I didn't even know what I had to do. I didn't know that I had to, you know, make a medical appointment and, you know, start that journey from scratch. And, you know, I'm an educated person in my 30s. So, you know, it's really helpful just to be given that guidance from the get-go. But I think, you know, from my point of view, hopefully I can give you some tips and tricks today and some lessons learnt, because I certainly didn't have all the answers when I started out, you know, when I was pregnant and had to communicate everything in respect of my parental leave. So, yeah, hopefully I'll be able to assist. I think I have the youngest child on the panel, so it is very fresh in my mind. And Judge Quinn, I'm still getting the snot smears on my jumpers, hopefully not today.
Catherine, you've obviously been thinking about this topic quite a bit for quite a few years. What sort of perspective do you bring to it?
Yeah, I guess I wrote the book Let's Make It Work, Baby when I was quite optimistic. I'm probably a little jaded now after having my second, so I've got a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. And my sister and I joked that I should write a second one called Maybe Don't Do It. I think my interest in this, I think it's a fantastic resource. But I think the legal industry itself, I think, has actually failed so many parents. And I'm no longer working for a law firm. And a big part of that was the lack of ability to obtain flexible work. And I've tried every type of law firm. I did a top tier, I did a mid tier, and then now work with Law Squared, which has provided me with amazing flexibility. But, you know, the work that I did in employment law meant that clients wanted access to me at all times. And, you know, I'm in awe of all of you still practicing and working in a law firm, because it's incredibly stressful and the time commitment is incredibly intense. So I think that there's got to be systemic change. And I think COVID has actually done a lot of credit to flexible work and our options that can come. But I also love that this is really tailored towards lawyers, because the reason I wrote the book was because I was asked to come and spend my one day off touring the state at maternal health nurse appointments and actually teaching people around how they can ask for flexible work. And the problem with that was I was only getting invited to do those talks in really affluent areas such as Port Melbourne or, you know, inner city. And I wasn't able to distribute that information to, and as Jane said, it's very different for different people, different socioeconomic areas, different industries. So I think it is really great that this is specific to lawyers, because I think we do face very bespoke issues. So yeah, congratulations, it's a great resource.
And Dan, back on the screen for us. Obviously, Maurice Blackburn's been heavily involved with the guide, but what about you from your personal perspective? How do you see it?
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to them. Yeah, I think one of the things that I really like about the guide is I remember when I first became a parent, I was really hungry for information. And then you sort of go out and find it and you realise there's a lot of information and some of it conflicts with each other. Some of it conflicts, and then you wonder, well, what information should I trust and what information shouldn't I trust? And some of that might just come down to different things work for different people and different babies. So some of it's explained by that. But the thing that I really like about this guide is if you're a lawyer reading it, it's been prepared by other lawyers who have also probably encountered the same sort of issues that you might encounter. And also they might, and it's also been prepared by sort of, or looked over by experts in sort of employment and industrial law. So there's a lot of information out there, but the thing that I really like about this is it's a sort of trusted source of information. And, you know, one of the things that I'm sort of passionate about as well is also that, you know, dads sort of get involved with parenting and parental responsibilities, and at the moment I think there's a big expectation gap about what's expected of mums and what's expected of dads when it comes to parenting kids, and so that's part of the reason why I'm here as well, to sort of sit on the panel and talk about these issues.
Thanks, Dan. That actually leads in really well to the next question. I was going to put this one to Judge Quinn. This one's really around our sort of language and actions in the industry, ensuring that we are breaking gendered biases, particularly when it comes to parental leave, but also in other areas. Obviously, things have changed quite a bit in the last 25 years or so that you've been in the profession. But do you have anything to sort of say about that and how we can address that as a profession?
I would agree with Catherine that really the legal profession is miles behind, and also that COVID has actually been a benefit for these kind of issues, because if anyone had said to me 3 years ago that we were going to be doing court like this, I would have said, I don't think so. And the Chief Justice came and spoke to us all and said, this is what's going to happen. Not COVID, but just, you know, this is the way we're going to start doing things. And all the judges just went, you're joking, we're not doing that. And we've all had to adapt. And what it does is show that you can have the flexibility that they probably were hesitant in the sense that I think that people just thought it couldn't work, whereas now I think that's been proven wrong. But I do think, though, that we're starting to get a kick back from that now, that I think that probably the more senior people at work are wanting people to come back into the offices. They don't want to go back to the flexible whatever. And I'm not sure, but I mean, I know some people with really young children and they were really happy to go back to the office. They didn't want to be staying at home. And I know for me, I didn't want to be staying home either. I went back to work very early with my first child because I was in the middle of a case. I didn't have to, but that was what I wanted to do. So it was me being happy. And I think that is the really most important thing that I hope all of you get out of from today, that if you are not happy, that being mum or dad or whoever, it's not going to work and it's not fun. And things have to give. I've really gone off the topic though, I'm sorry.
So these are fabulous insights. I guess, I mean, in some ways, what I thought we would do today is move through the guide piece by piece. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about preparing to go on leave, a bit about communication, then what happens while you are away, and then also something that's sort of not addressed in depth, but what it's like to return and what happens when you do return. So I think the next question that I had was around communicating leave. Jane, do you have any tips and tricks for people with communicating?
Yeah, so I was working at the Office of Public Prosecutions at the time, but I think, look, I had a level of anxiety actually about communicating my first pregnancy. Female manager, amazing, understanding, lovely person. But I think it was all about the expectations that I had of myself. So, that daunting thought of, who's going to manage my files. I'd just been appointed as a supervisor for a legal trainee. So for a 12, 18-month period, huge time commitment, really intensive work with them to ensure that they were compliant with their LSB requirements. And so that was all weighing on my mind. I think, she would have to find a new supervisor and all of that. So I think I didn't put it off, but I think come the normal 16-week mark, I kind of communicated to my manager, I need to have a discussion with you. I just need to talk to you about something. So I wander into her office, and she had a great big smile on her face, and she said, "Congratulations." So I don't know whether I was glowing or whether the belly was starting to emerge, but it just goes to show people are so understanding about it. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, perhaps unnecessarily. I know Catherine mentioned, just the sheer commitment to our work. I think often as lawyers, it's not, it's the nature of the game. It's hard going, and there's a lot of pressure, especially as you rise, I guess, in seniority. So look, that was my experience, and it was a lovely one. But yeah, I think it's important to remember that 9 times out of 10, the colleague sitting next to you or your boss is a parent, and they've been through it, or their wives or partners have been through it. So, it's often easy to be insular and to think, I'm the only one that this is happening to, but it's happened lots of times. And I think if you're just honest and open with your communication, then you can start planning. I mean, we have if you're communicating around that 16-week mark, you've got 6 months to plan for it and to communicate adequately with your clients or, the stakeholders, and so that they're well prepared as well. And I mean, it was tough at that point as well. As I noted, I was at the OPP and trial division, so I was dealing with a lot of cases that involved a lot of victim engagement, so, a lot of fatality matters. So you build extensive rapport with those victims, and they rely on you to a great extent to manage the case and to communicate with them. So, yeah, there were certainly challenges, but I think just be open and honest and communicate as early as you can. And I'm almost certain that 9 times out of 10 you'll have a receptive person on the other end.
Catherine, some of the things that Jane has sort of raised were around leadership, but also career progression during this important time. You obviously made a few moves over the last sort of 6 years or so since you've had children. Do you have any sort of advice for leaders, but also sort of for managing your own leadership path during that time?
Yeah, sure. So I made sure, first and foremost, I made partner first. So that was my commitment to myself. And to be able to do that, I had to move to a smaller firm to be a bigger fish. So I made really strategic decisions, specifically based on age, where I was going to get the best opportunity, fit obviously with values, because I chose a firm I felt really safe. I actually have MS, so I came out to them that I had a disability. I then felt really comfortable to tell them when I was going to have a baby, and they were really family friendly. But for me, the biggest thing, I guess, I was a partner at the time when I announced it, and what I learned is that no one likes change. We all know that. So if you're a manager of people, they're not going to like the fact that something is changing. They might be happy for you personally, but I was in charge of a young team. We were very close, and there was a grieving process as part of that actually really shocked me. So there were colleagues that were upset that I was not going to be working with them in the same manner or have some time away. So that was a really interesting learning for me. but then I actually made the move to law squared when I was 9 months pregnant. So it was a big decision because I was losing 6 months paid parental leave. So financially, it was such a big loss. But I just felt like I couldn't leave and have my baby and take my paid parental leave and then not be 100% in my heart ready to go back to that firm. So I made the leap at the 9-month phase.
Yep.
And how I dealt with that financially was to then continue to work from day dot, but do that from home in my own manner. And so I just did a day a week, spread over a week, and was able to sort of keep in touch but still be at home with my baby. So there's lots of different ways, I guess, that you can work and return to work or not take leave. As Judge Quinn said, sometimes it's actually the parents' desire to continue to work. It gave me so much enjoyment. I'm a better parent whilst I continue to work. I just have to make sure I engage the right people to help support me so that I can keep working. But I think you can still progress and you can still make big moves, but you've first and foremost got to think about, I think, financial and what's going to be in your best interest. Yeah.
Oh, that's thanks for sharing that story. Dan, I'm going to ask you sort of a bit of an employment law question here. What are some of the sort of legal issues that can arise around communicating a pregnancy or an intention to take parental leave? And how does that sort of work in with offers and promotions and things like that? I think you might still be on mute. It's the quote of the last 2 years.
It's an occupational hazard these days. So, so in terms of giving notice, the legal requirements are to sort of give 10 weeks notice in writing of the dates you're intending to take leave. And then you need to confirm it 4 weeks before you start leave. Obviously, parents who are giving birth, there are certain things that can or can't be sort of predicted when it comes to those things. So if, something unexpected happens, then it's just as soon as practicable, notice needs to be given. In terms of promotion and things like that, I was really lucky with my experience. I actually applied to be promoted to principal while I was on my first round of parental leave, and I was really supported by the firm, and I think it was I was informed that I was successful when I came back to leave, when I came back from leave, and I know even I remember I was talking to one of our sort of senior partners, Kate Booth, who I think probably 35 years ago said she actually got promoted to partner at Morris Blackburn while she was on parental leave, which back then I suspect would have been pretty uncommon as well. So lucky to work in a place like that. But I think probably the important thing is for people going on parental leave is if that's something that you want to do is to be promoted, I think you still need to say that and show interest in that. And if there's a process, you need to speak to your supervisor or whoever the appropriate person is about putting in that application and make it known that that's still something that you want and you're keen on. It would, firms shouldn't be, or an employer shouldn't be saying because you're on parental leave you can't participate in this process. And in fact, I think it's incumbent on employers and firms to really be thinking about the people who are on parental leave, not just saying, okay, well, that person's on parental leave, we're not going to worry about them this year. They need to be actively thinking, well, in our usual process, how do we determine who gets promoted and who doesn't, and to actually actively make sure that people are on parental leave or have caring responsibilities don't miss out.
Thanks, Dan. Some great tips there. Sort of picking up on what you're saying, I'm going to turn the scenario around. We've got 4 leaders in the profession in this panel. And I guess as leaders in the profession, we all have a responsibility to make sure that we are a diverse and equitable industry. What is it that leaders can do as opposed to kind of employees in this area to make people who are going through this period of change feel supported and included? I'm sorry, you're all going to have to jump in at the same time. We might go to Catherine first.
Yeah, I think it's really important just to note that 50% of women experience pregnancy-related discrimination. So it's great that Dan was able to get that promotion, but I think we have to acknowledge it's not the reality for so many. Or in the legal industry, I think there's a lot of promotion whilst you're on parental leave, which is great, but then you've got to provide the support for people when they come back. There's got to be that flow-on support that needs to come, and that has, again, systemic change. Sorry, what was the question? I had to get that out.
I suppose picking
Yeah.
up on that, really, sort of what
how can we
expectations
do-
should we
yes.
have of leaders, or what can we do as
Yeah,
leaders?
I think we have to lead loudly. So we have to say ourselves, I have a life. I have a life outside of law or outside of my profession. I love my children. I'm going to go pick them up at 3 o'clock because I'm actually just exhausted and I miss them, and I'll pick up that file tonight. Like, we've got to start talking about that and leading by example. We've also got to make sure that we're not fostering that culture of overwork, and we're not saying you need to work on the weekends, or we're not giving you, oh, yeah, sure, you can work 4 days a week, but you have to actually work 7 to get through the workload. We need to be sort of leading by example and making sure that we ourselves show that there's value, and you'll be a better, we know that you'll have better employees if they've got that balance and they can have that rest and respite.
Can I add something here?
Yes, sure.
I agree with what you're saying, but often the difficulty when those kind of things are occurring is that the staff members who don't have children aren't particularly happy about the situation, because they say, well, you know, she's got kids and I haven't, and I'm working just as hard, and she doesn't have to do this or he doesn't have to do that. So my only sort of advice in relation to that is, yeah, we need to do those things, like if there's something important going on at school or whatever, to go. But just concentrate on yourself. And although other people around might sort of say, well, this isn't fair and whatever, I think that it's really important that those kind of people understand that you are, in fact, just doing the same thing, and their extra interests still are as important as yours. It is striking a balance, but I just throw a word of caution into sort of driving, well, you know, you've got a child under 5, so, you know, it's fine if you leave at whatever time, but it might stick your colleague in a situation where they then get very annoyed and upset. I mean, I don't know, because I haven't worked in a firm for a very long time. But those kind of things, I think, can happen. And I think then in terms of leaders, you need to be conscious of that in a group, so that those kind of mumblings don't, you know, create a lot worse kind of work environment. I don't know if anyone agrees with that kind of
So true.
feelings.
Yeah, maybe it's about sort of bringing everyone along in the work-life balance sort of journey. And I do think it's really important that single people or people without families or, you know, whatever situation they're in, also have the right to kind of call it and be able to spend time doing the things that make them happy and that they enjoy. And I think part of that culture of overwork probably is overriding that as well. So I think we might move on now to the experience of taking leave. Everyone on the panel has taken a period of leave. It sounds like all of that looked a little bit different for each person. Does anybody want to share their experience as to what that was like for them?
Well, I can start with my first child. I was at the bar and I didn't take hardly any leave, and it was terrible. And it wasn't that terrible, but my head wasn't around having a baby. My head was still in the case that I was in. And I just advise anyone who is having a baby to at least have a couple of weeks off before you have the baby, because it's such a huge thing, particularly your first one. But then by the second and third ones for me, I was a permanent prosecutor, so I was entitled to 12 months paid leave from the government. And I went back to work for both the kids after 11 months or so, but then took 48 on 52, which meant that I had 8 weeks holiday a year. So you've got to make some compromises in terms of the money you can earn, the kind of work you can do. I mean, I took that at the bar. I probably would have had better work maybe, but it's just me, myself and my family. That was the best way to do it. And it meant that I continued to work. I didn't have huge, long periods of years out of work, which a lot of my peers did.
Can I just ask Judge Quinn, did you go insane with your first 11-month bout of not working? Like, how did you mentally juggle switching from work mode into child mode?
That wasn't too hard because it was my second child. And I knew how I'd mucked it up with the first one. So with the second one, it was a lot more relaxed. I mean, the whole job was a lot more relaxed. Being a permanent prosecutor, even though you do the same kind of work, you had a lot more control over the work that you did than when you're at the bar, because at the bar you could just be throwing things sort of left, right and centre from anywhere. Whereas I made that conscious decision to earn less money and have better conditions in the public service because I knew I was going to have more children. Well, hoped, and I did. So that was sort of how that worked. And telling employers and things about, I'm going on leave for this amount of time or whatever, they were very relaxed in those days. It wasn't fearful at all. So, but I mean, I'm a bit different because the job's very secure. It's not like you're sort of trying to, there's sort of government appointments, so they're a little bit different than being employed as such.
Jane, I think you've most recently taken leave on the panel. What was that experience like?
Look, I think it was a lot of planning and the financial side of things as well. So, really considering what leave you're getting, what entitlements you have. So I took, I think, 9 months off. But also often is the case with parents having their first child, you usually look at upgrading or upsizing your house. So at the same time, we bid off a huge mortgage. So it was, we were right in looking at budgets and, again, there was a level of anxiety around that, thinking about, being paid the minimum wage on government parental leave was absolutely daunting for me. But look, gosh, it's the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. Still is challenging. But yeah, look, it was good. I had really intense baby brain. Gosh, I don't know how I even survived in those early days. And I resigned my position at the OPP during maternity leave and applied for another position and got another position in a managing kind of role. So that was also a huge challenge. I was really concerned. I mean, Judge Quinn, you're a more ambitious woman than I, but I was really concerned about trial work. So, even though I wasn't running trials, it's really intensive work. My husband's a criminal defence lawyer. He would have been doing trial work. And I think all of these unknowns about potentially being stuck in court and, so I looked for another job. I didn't even try going back to the OPP. I just thought, what am I going to do? You can't just tell your counsel that you're unable to research this, admissibility of evidence issue because you've got to go to pick up your child from childcare. So, for me and for our family, it was best that I look for a different position. So, and again, hopefully we'll get into it, but that threw up its own challenges in starting at a new workplace from maternity leave.
Can I just add, Natalie?
Yeah.
I think we've really got to be truthful about depression in the workforce as well. I've never experienced depression. I don't have any mental illness, but there's a very high prevalence in the law. And I think why that's relevant is because when you're type A personality, you're used to being very in control of your life. We're seeing women having children, so parents having children later in their life. So we've experienced, I was like 34 years into my life of being able to fully control it, work 7 till 9, whatever hours I wanted, do whatever I wanted. And then you have this perfection mentality because that's what's expected in the law. And then you have a baby, as Jen said, that completely turns your world upside down. And the thing that I found most frustrating was that everything's in flux because what might work for 6 weeks doesn't work for the 6 weeks after. And you think, I've got something in place now for the next 12 months, it'll be fine, and then things change all the time. So I think we just have to be really honest with ourselves around postnatal depression being high risk, and particularly non-vaginal births can give high risk. We know that breastfeeding assists in preventing some of that postnatal depression. And if you're going back to work and you're not breastfeeding, then we need to just be aware that all of these things add those elements of risk, and that we should just be honest with ourselves as high achievers, type A people. We need to think about how is that going to impact us personally and make those really strategic decisions that Jane did. That is, I think you've got to be thinking survival mode, what's in my best interest, and just be really focused on that. Yeah.
Yeah, look, one of the things that I was sort of going to raise is my first period of maternity leave was 4 months, so it was quite a short, relatively short period. But I did come back I started the readers course at 4 months, so it was sort of somewhat different to going back to work as such because I was doing a course. And for me, it was pre-pandemic, so it was 2016. I did find going from like a fun workplace. I had lots of colleagues that were kind of in their late 20s, early 30s. It was a lot of social enjoyment working on cases. It was a real contrast to be at home by myself with a baby that doesn't really sort of do anything. The way that I sort of dealt with it was I was lucky in that I had a relatively straightforward and healthy birth, healthy baby, which obviously not everybody gets. I really threw myself into kind of mothers groups and seeking support, making friends, because that's sort of what suits me. Other people, they want to bury down a little bit more. They want to have a bit more home time. And for me, kind of going back and starting the course was actually really fun. I wasn't kind of upset about having a short maternity leave. And the bar's obviously quite an unusual workplace in that it is in some ways very flexible and in other ways totally inflexible. So it's sort of a different set of issues and not employment issues as such.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. As lawyers, like sometimes it can be hard to ask for help and to get support. And I think you'd also be right in that we probably are quite high risk for these issues. Also, it's something that can happen to men when they take leave as well. But yeah, I think definitely encouraging people to get as much support as possible is really important. Dan, from a dad perspective, what was your period of parental leave like?
Look, I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun. I think that one thing that I wanted to sort of get across today is just I think there are different cultural expectations on sort of mums and dads about how much they're expected to do and that sort of thing, and it sort of comes out in a lot of ways. And actually, Annabelle Crabb wrote a quarterly essay about it called Men at Work, and if you haven't read it, it's an excellent essay and explores a lot of these issues. But it manifests itself in a lot of ways, such as often men don't have, or dads don't have, the parental leave entitlements like paid parental leave. So because I worked at Morris Blackburn and we've got a union enterprise agreement, I was entitled to 18 weeks paid parental leave as a primary carer. But I think even the evidence shows that even when that exists, men don't always take it as well because they're not encouraged or expected to sort of take leave. And I think that's something that really needs to shift, both because it's holding men and dads back from being fulfilled, spending time with their kids, but it's also holding women back as well, because the evidence is also that after couples have kids, it's usually the mums and the women who are taking on more of the domestic and caring responsibilities. I also saw, I really enjoyed it, but I also saw that play out in my time on parental leave as well. So number one, as soon as you say that you're taking extended parental leave, everyone says, "Oh, you're a really good dad" or whatever. But like, no one says that to women. Everyone's just like, "Oh, you're just doing your job." And so there's like that.
I have to say, nobody did ever tell me I was doing a good thing.
Well, exactly. And so every time my wife hears people say that to me, she gets really mad. It's just it should be just. And so I think we need to examine those expectations inside ourselves and how they play out. And just another example of that was because I've taken the last sort of 18 weeks of the 12-month period after our kids were born. And so it's been my job to sort of enrol them into daycare and get those the Centrelink numbers and do all that work. And on the childcare forms, I've filled them all out, and you need to nominate like a primary contact and who's going to be the person for Centrelink purposes, and so they can give you the childcare rebate and all that sort of stuff. And both times I've nominated myself, and both times they've put Cara, my wife's name, down as that person, and which means like we couldn't claim the childcare rebate, and it was a whole big rigmarole. But like they specifically asked for this information on the form, and I put my name down, and they've just ignored that and put my wife's name down. And similar thing is they always call her first, and we've told them no, just call me first. And it's not they're not intending to be difficult or anything like that. It's just this sort of very deeply seated and ingrained cultural expectations that we really need to re-examine. And actually another one was, Jane, you were talking about, getting a new mortgage and a new house and that sort of stuff. And, we had the same thing. And they a lot of the banks, they say, well, if the wife or the person giving birth is going on parental leave, we won't count her income because we don't know if she's ever going to come back from parental leave. And I said, well, I'm going on parental leave for an extended period. They're like, oh, no, that's fine. Don't worry. And we can count your income even though you're going on parental leave. But there's just this ingrained assumption that women are just going to stay home and look after the kids. And I think that's the main thing holding us back. And I think it's something that we really need to examine both in ourselves and at a structural level.
Can I just add something to that? Up until my children were in year 12, even though I was not the person on the thing, 3 kids through 13 years of school, they would always ring me first.
Yeah.
And I'd say, and I'd be in court and I'd think, oh, shit, what's happened?
Yeah.
And I'd say, why didn't you ring my husband?
Yeah.
But honestly, that's something that I don't know what it's going to take to change, but it just doesn't change unless, of course, you only put the father's number or the whoever partner's number,
Yeah, that's right.
And this is why we said we have to change the gender language, right? So it's no longer primary. Yeah. We're moving away from primary carer. What is a primary carer? Like we're both parents, all family members are responsible for that child. And it's great that you're calling it parental leave in practice. It's no longer maternity and paternity. So, I think we have to get away from those gender expectations. And Elizabeth Broderick did some amazing research and went to the Nordic countries and asked them, how have you achieved it? And as Daniel's saying, they actually have a penalty on men. So if you don't take it, you're actually financially penalised. So all men take it. And the other thing that I asked her after she did that research was, for small businesses, when someone takes 12 months away, they're inevitably going to be made redundant because the whole world within a small business has changed within a 12-month period. Like it's just so common. And she said the way that the Nordic countries deal with it is that people take shorter periods of leave because when they come back, they can work much more flexibly. So I think there's that gender issue, and then there's that when you return, you don't have to be there 5 days a week, 1,000 hours a week.
That's some fantastic reflections there, and thanks everyone for sharing their experiences. I was going to ask about something that's a relatively, it's been around for a few years, but not all that long, and that's keeping in touch days. Has anybody either as a sort of manager or as when they're on leave themselves used their keeping in touch days? And I'm sort of interested to know how that practically worked out. Has anyone had a go at that?
I didn't.
You didn't?
No, I did do my CPD.
Oh,
and
very good.
That was the extent of my keeping in touch.
What about you, Catherine?
Yeah, so I was working at Australian Industry Group when Heather Ridout was our CEO, and we actively advocated for keeping in touch provisions to be inserted into the legislation. And I thought, geez, that's strange because we're an employer association. Why are we putting obligations on ourselves? And Heather said, no, this is a great thing. She had children herself. She said, this is a great thing because if we legislate it, employers will know that it actually is their responsibility to keep in touch with people whilst they're still employed. They're just not there in the office. So she was a really strong advocate for it. Basically what it means is that whilst you're on leave, you can come back and get paid for training, for updates, for that contact with your team. So I think it's really effective if it's utilised. But I think realistically, people, if they come to me and say, oh, I haven't seen the last time, no, this is what they always say. The last time I heard from my boss was when they sent flowers to the hospital and I've been on leave for 12 months. Now, I'm sorry, but that is a dual obligation. You have to keep in touch with your employer. You have to keep in touch with what's going on in your workplace to keep your seat at the table. There's those discussions about lean in, Sheryl Sandberg, and then everyone said, no, women should be able to lean out. It's like, yes, you can lean out, but keep your seat at the table. Even if you don't think you want to return, make sure that you've got that entitlement to be able to return if you do decide you want to and if you want to go back. Yeah. So I think that's why keeping in touch is so good. It's an obligation on both parties though.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Dan, did you do any keeping in touch, or it wasn't something?
I didn't. I mean, because I was only off for about 4.5 months, so it's probably a bit shorter than some people. I did sort of bits and pieces where I needed to, but I didn't formally use a keeping in touch day. I think they're a really good idea. And I think the best thing that they're for, the one of the main things that they can be utilised for is like when you're having sort of like, I don't know, like a social activity or a retreat or something like that. That's the perfect time to sort of use those sort of things. So you still stay in touch with the team and still feel like you're part of the team. And so I think, as well as the legal entitlement, I think everyone at work still needs to think about, if there is someone on parental leave and you're having some sort of social activity or catch up or work dinner or function or whatever, always extending that invitation that say, look, no obligation to go, because a lot of time people won't be able to go, but we're having this and feel free to come along, because otherwise you do need to make that conscious effort to make sure people are sort of invited along to those things, so they do sort of stay in touch and still feel like part of the team, because otherwise there can be a bit of out of sight, out of mind sort of thing. And so it's important to not let that just be the default.
Moving now to something I'm sure people are pretty interested in, and I think sometimes it does get a little bit missed in the conversations about this period of people's lives, and that's the return to work. I might start with you, Judge Quinn, but hopefully we'll be able to get around to everyone to what that experience was like for them. Judge Quinn, you've sort of foreshadowed that you came back to a different role, but what was that like coming back, and what were your care arrangements? What was the transition like for you returning each time?
Well, the first time was probably it was sort of easier because you've only got one, and I used like a childcare creche facility that was near my home, and my husband used to drop him off and I'd pick him up, and there wasn't really any dramas there. But once you have more than one child, the cost of childcare is quite significant, and I've got 4 years between my first and second. So the first one was at kindergarten, and then I just had this baby and I'd had a year off. But we managed to get one of the people who worked at the childcare centre to come and work for us. So we had her as a nanny really until my youngest child was about school age. But then she stayed with us and worked for my neighbours who had babies. So, if you can try and get those kind of relationships, it's really good, particularly when your kids are back at school, because you don't need the full-time care. I found that university students were often the best people to pick, and you'd sort of get a bunch of them that were all friends, and, if you trust them enough, they all work together as to who's doing what. You don't have to sort of worry about all those things, but it also means you come home and the kids are ready, like they've had dinner. You're not missing out on much. But that's sort of the way that we were able to manage it, because I really think the costs, once you've got more than one child in care, are just too high. And, I mean, I can honestly say a lot of the time I was working, I really wasn't making any money because of the cost of the childcare. But these are things you've also got to throw up in the air, I think, because I don't think I would have been able to do what I've done if I hadn't consistently remained in touch. And that's taking, a year each time for the last two. But I don't think I could have done that otherwise. So, you've just got to relax a bit and see the bigger picture rather than this is all terrible and we haven't got any money and blah, 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 blah. If you're patient, it will happen as long as you're happy.
Catherine, I think you've probably had the most sort of chopping and changing in the return process. What was it like for you, and what sort of flexible arrangements did you have?
Both times were pretty painful, to be honest. The first time I decided to go with a feminist lens and say, I'm going to do the first 3 months and my husband will do the second 3 months. And it was a bit of a disaster. It was pre-flexible, like as in work from home times. But I just sort of underappreciated the reliance of a baby on the breastfeeding parent. And, it turned out our oldest son has ASD1, which is they used to call Asperger's. So childcare was not suitable for him. It was completely like sensory overwhelm. We tried it for 18 months and it was a disaster. So similar to Judge Quinn, we have actually found that the best care for us and for our family is in-home nanny, so through an au pair. So we actually get the benefit of the cultural experience. We've had a German, a Swedish, and now an Italian. We get to, our kids get exposed to different languages and lots of nice food. The downside is you're taking a big risk on having someone come to the country that you don't know, and you have to have them live with you, so you need that space. But for us, especially as Judge Quinn said, after the first child, financially it just makes so much more sense. And the benefit for us in these COVID days is that if the child is sick, that you've still got in-home care. So I can still work, she can up her hours, we'll pay her more obviously. School holidays, you've got that benefit as well. But I think what I learned was that you just have to try all the different types of childcare. So childcare might be great for one child, not great for the other. There's also family daycare, which I was a bit nervous about because of cases I'd been involved in, but we found a beautiful husband and wife who provided great family daycare for us for a period of time. Then they closed down. You've just got to be really flexible and keep trialling different things. And the other thing I was going to say is I did actually hire an amazing woman to take over my role as partner. So because I knew that I wasn't going to be coming back full time, I knew I wanted to have some flexibility and some time at home with my children, even though I'm not great being in that role. I need to do some of it sometimes. And so, it was really great for me to know, okay, I'm not going to be coming back into that partner role because I've actually found another woman to do that partner role. And I was really sort of real with myself that I wasn't going to be coming back in that capacity. And then obviously went to law squared and again, just took a bit of a backseat. But I think the biggest learning for me is when you return to work, you've really got to, what I had to learn was that if you're there, you're expected to perform and you're expected to be on 100%. To be quite frank, at Law Squared when I returned, I thought I was a bit of a hero for just turning up, and I had my baby with me often. And that's actually not enough, because if you're going to be there and if you're going to be in a leadership role, you really have to have your crap together. You have to be prepared. So I think it's good to have that, just to understand in that mindset that if you're going to be there, you have to really be there. And the benefits are that you get paid and you get to keep within your leadership role, but you really have to kind of turn up. That was my hard lesson.
Dan, were there any issues or lessons that you learned on the return?
Definitely. I think so. With our first child, Eve, I sort of went back to work, and at the same week that she started childcare, sort of 3 days a week, and it was just an absolute disaster because I think she was sick for the first 3 months. She probably went to 3 days of childcare in the first 3 months, and I was trying to return to work, and my wife was working, and it was very hard and very difficult. With our second child, so Jack, we actually enrolled him in childcare basically when he was about 8 months old, just 1 day a week, and he started familiarising himself with it. He did get sick a lot still, but I was on parental leave at the time, and so I just looked after him, and so we didn't have that sort of stress. And so if you can, I would sort of really recommend that, to just familiarise them, and also so they start, as soon as they start going, they get the bugs, and then and now with COVID, it's also a lot worse, because it used to be if they got a runny nose, which they do from when they start childcare till about the age of 3, it used to be just pack them along and they can go, but now they can't go to childcare with a runny nose, which makes it very hard. And so as a result of that, we've got a nanny on Mondays. So we at least know on Mondays, like, even if he's got a runny nose, we'll still at least have care for that day. And then we just make do for the other days as well. So, I mean, COVID has really changed the game, made it a lot harder. And I still don't think there's been a proper reckoning of that. It's made things easier because of flexible work, but with like daycare and runny noses and sickness policies, it's actually made things a lot harder as well. Now, I'm sort of lucky. Me and my wife can work from home in the roles that we do, and we can sort of manage and work outside of hours and different hours and that sort of thing. But I can't see how you do if you work in a factory, or if you work in a warehouse, or if you work in retail and you actually need to go to your physical job. I think it's next to impossible.
Jane, you have sort of done this quite recently, and also the pandemic's probably affected almost the whole time that you've
that's right.
gone through this process. What has the return been like for you?
Yeah, so I think one issue that I did want to talk about is breastfeeding. So I returned to work at 9 when my son was 9 months old, and was a breastfeeding mum. So look, it did take a bit of planning. I had to make inquiries in relation to available spaces. Victoria Police, as you may know, has the beautiful VPC building up on Spencer Street. I'm not in that building, so much to my dismay, when I inquired, I was offered the sleeping pod, which is the sworn members' sleeping pod, which hopefully, which it's a private space and it's it's relatively comfortable, but that's.
Is there anyone sleeping in there?
No one's sleeping. It has a lockable door. They provided me with a sign, but. I guess these are kind of the lessons or the tips and tricks that I was hoping to convey to you. If you can, fight for something better than the sleeping pod. You actually have a right to have something better than that. I mean, Nina would probably, it ticks the boxes, the minimum requirement. So it's, there's lighting, there's a space to put your pump and things like that. There's a fridge available, not in the pod, but available. So it does actually tick the boxes, but, employers are required to provide you with that space. Look, I'm somewhat like Judge Quinn. I have high expectations of myself and my work performance. So coming back to work, I decided a decision that worked for me was to pump in my lunch break. So pursuant to the policy and the law for government employees or VPS employees, you are allowed a 1 hour lactation break in addition to any breaks that you are otherwise entitled. I decided to utilise my lunch break, and it broke up my day. It was good for timing for me. And I felt that I was in court when I went back to work. So I remember one day being stuck in a 1-day voir dire, a really challenging admissibility argument in relation to expert evidence. And I was overflowing, and I'm like, I'm not going to get lunch. I'm dying because I've had 4 hours sleep and I need to run. Yeah, and risk of mastitis. I think it's really important to remember for first-time mums. There's a real risk if you're not pumping when you should be. And I have had mastitis twice, and it's shocking, close to being hospitalised for it. So you really need to look after yourself. But the further challenge was coming into a new workplace back from maternity leave. In a leadership role. So, having to build rapport with colleagues and with subordinates and having to perform to a really high standard. So, look, I think some comments that Catherine made really resonated with me. You need to review your expectations of yourself. You can't do those 12-hour days anymore. It actually is not an option for you unless you're going home, doing all the bed, bath, bottle, putting your child to bed, and then maybe fitting in some hours in the evening if that's something that works for you and your family. But I really had to adjust that and find efficiencies in the way that I worked and be really organised, get up early, make sure that the childcare bag is packed or whatever it means. It's really practical things that you need to consider. And my hat goes off to parents everywhere, extraordinary. We weren't meant to be and I'm not just women, men as well, but we weren't meant to have careers and high-flying careers and be mums at the same time. Biologically, historically, we weren't built for that. So really be easy on yourself in relation to that. We're doing amazing things every day. Sometimes if I could get I remember driving to the train station from childcare, and it was 7:30 in the morning, and I'm like, I said out loud to myself, "You're amazing!" Like, I got my child to childcare at 7:30 and was going to get to work on time. Amazing! Like, it's those small wins that you have to really celebrate.
You are amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, look, there's so many great reflections that come out of that. The one thing that I wanted to add is I found the transition from returning to work with one child versus returning to work with two children, and I'm sure 3 would be even more. Having a second child, just for the sort of parenting part, I loved that. It was a really fun time. I didn't have all of the nerves and the anxiety that I had around my first.
Yeah.
I sort of felt like, oh, look, I'm a bit of a pro here. I sort of didn't read anything, ignored all advice, and just sort of did what I wanted. But the practical reality of getting the 2 kids out the door, paying for 2 lots of daycare, I think it ended up, we worked out, it's like around 20 to 25,000 out of pocket to pay for full-time daycare for each child. It's 140 a day. That's without including any of the CCS cap.
Yeah.
A lot of lawyers and a lot of legal families may well be above the income threshold for the CCS, so you need to be aware that you might not get a childcare rebate.
Yeah.
And we sort of realised, wow, like we're sort of paying top-tier private school prices for a service that like 20% of the time we actually can't use because the kids are sick.
Yeah.
So it is a financial reality, but also just the practical of getting 2 kids out, having them happy, having them dropped off and picked up, and then, into bed and dinner was a big adjustment for me. So I would sort of say that it is something to be aware of, and maybe factor in that your second return to work might be very different to your first.
So stop here, Natalie.
I don't know.
I was just going to say, don't stop. Doesn't make any difference. It goes along with everyone.
I think it's probably almost one of those things where the happiness it gets you're at a net equal. The happiness that you get versus the effort you put in it, you balance. The other thing I was just going to ask, this is a question for you, Judge Quinn. Litigation, which is obviously something that I do, I know Dan does a lot of litigation as well, is a particularly sort of specific work environment that lawyers are in. Do you have any tips for parents and litigation?
It's very hard because it's so inflexible. A lot would depend on your individual judge, and the judge has got to do so many things, and the last thing they want to know is that someone who's appearing before them is running late because their kids, whatever, or, this is really one of the real problems, I think, with people with care of young children, or even just, parents, anyone who you've got the care of, because the cost of court not running at the particular times it's supposed to run, the cost of litigation itself, they're all things that the judge will be, and the court will be really conscious of, and it really is quite inflexible. And that was, when I was a prosecutor, that was one of the main reasons I took the job, because I knew that the work would be, or I wouldn't get it at the last minute, so it would be a lot more structured. And I was also able to take enough leave. And I was in a pretty good position. I didn't really work many weekends. So it's just trying to work out, if you're going to be in litigation, the problem is that you have to be focused on the court. It's like when Catherine was saying, when you're at work, you've actually got to be at work. When you're in court, you can't be sitting there thinking about, who's going to pick this person up and I hope they're okay and la, 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 la. And if you're really feeling like that and there's a real problem, you just tell the judge or tell the associate or whatever. But way it is structured now, it really is a very difficult task. And I think that all you can do is hope that you're able to juggle it as much as you can, rather than sort of thinking we're going to have this major change because it just involves so many people as well. There's not the flexibility that does exist with other things. But when I say that, if you are not in court and you want to do something, do it. Like if you want to leave work at 3:00, do. That's the really, you get the benefit of those kind of things.
I actually had a really good experience in the Fair Work Commission, where commissioners allowed me breastfeeding breaks.
Oh, that's
So
great.
for my second baby, I actually decided I can't handle pumping, and I actually employed a nanny to bring the baby to me. So what would happen is we would either be on the Law Squared office floor, baby needed a feed, I'd feed the baby, au pair would take the baby out, I would then have to go to Fair Work Commission, I would advise when I'd probably need to have a break, and they were so amazing at always ensuring that I could do that. I mean, obviously it's a tribunal, so it might be a little bit less formal, but I was very appreciative of that and quite surprised at how flexible they were.
That's great to know.
I think you'd find most judicial officers would be sympathetic, but there's also the other part that the work just has to get done.
Yeah. I have a sort of largely employment, industrial, commercial practice, so it's a bit different to crime because I'm not in court every day, but then I have longer periods of being in court, or either that or very short one-day sort of periods. And I've sort of developed a bit of a zoning system. So if I'm in court, I basically tell every single person, including people like my neighbours, my parents, my in-laws, this is a red zone. Do not ask me for anything. If you require anything of me, you need to contact me after this point in time. And basically the house goes into, like, it honestly looks like a crime scene. Quite terrible. And nothing, I don't do any cooking, shopping, I don't do any clothes. I try to get home for like a bedtime, maybe like a 7 o'clock bedtime, half an hour with the kids. I'll try to drop them off depending on the time of the hearing starting. And I'm pretty much in a hearing sort of, trial zone. But then after that, I always make sure that I schedule a good, potentially just actual leave time off after the case, or, a really low-key time where I'll be coming in at 10, I might leave and do all the school pickups. And I sort of try and factor in with my partner's work that he then makes sure if he's got a busy time, he can put it into that period when I'm sort of in a little bit of almost like a part-time period. So in some ways I sort of do feel like I work part-time. I just don't work it on a weekly basis. I kind of work it over a much broader basis. But I think that's sort of one way that litigation has sort of been managed for me.
Awesome.
I think we probably need to wrap up. Does anybody want to just give a final comment to everyone here about their experiences or what people can expect, or just one parting message from each panellist?
It's the best thing I've ever done, so don't be scared off by all the hard elements of it. It's a really great thing to do.
What about you, Jane?
Yeah, and I think I touched on it earlier, but just remember that lots of people have done it before you and lots of people will do it after you. So don't be hard on yourself, and you will most likely have the support. And I think from a government point of view as well, I think I've seen some real positive changes in the cultures, and especially with the way that men are responding to women or parents in the workplace. So I think, I do think there's hope is what I can say for us all.
That's great to know. And what about you, Dan?
Like I said before, just examine those assumptions that you might have or people around you have about what dads and men should be doing and how much they're doing, and think about in your own life, and just when you see it, think about how we have those expectations and how we might be able to change them for everyone's benefit.
And the birthday participant, Judge Quinn, any final?
Can I just say that there is absolutely no way known, I really honestly say this, that I would be where I was if I didn't have a very good group of friends who I've befriended from my children's kindergarten and primary school, the parents. As your kids get older, their needs are very different. I was just so fortunate to have people who lived near me who were prepared to run my children around. They were just throwing another kid in the car. And it really is important to have that kind of support. It doesn't cost anything, and it really was invaluable for me.
That's wonderful. Build a village, I think. Thank you so much to each of our panellists. I found this discussion so enlightening, and I wish that I had have attended something like this prior to experiencing my time in and out of work. But I think our diverse sort of range of experiences really just goes to show how much is changing and has changed in the profession, and that we have a lot of people who have a lot of great ideas about how we can continue to change and also to lead in this area. So thanks very much to everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
really thank all our panellists for coming today and volunteering their time to this very important topic. And thank you to our wonderful moderator as well, Natalie. You made the event flow really well and really important questions, which allowed for extraordinary answers as well. So just a token of our appreciation, we have some gifts just to hand out to our panellists and to our moderator.
Thank you.
Judge Quinn and Daniel Victory, you'll get your gifts online. And we want to also say some final thanks to Morris Blackburn for hosting this event. So thank you so much for putting all this together and making it happen. And to the entire Work Practices Committee with Victoria Women Lawyers Group. Everyone worked so hard on this event, and we just want to thank you all.